When a television show captures the public's imagination the way Dexter did, it's only natural for fans to turn to the original source material, hoping to experience more of what they loved. In this case, that source is Jeff Lindsay's Dexter book series, a collection of novels that first introduce the world to the blood-spatter analyst with a dark secret, starting with darkly dreaming Dexter in 2004. But for many readers, those books come as a bit of a shock, and not necessarily in a good way. The most common reaction that they're nearly unreadable, and while that may sound harsh, it doesn't come out of nowhere. At first glance, the differences between the books and the show don't seem that drastic. You've still got Dexter, a charming sociopath working for Miami Metro. He hunts killers, lives by a strict moral code taught to him by his adoptive father Harry, and narrates everything in that chillingly calm voice fans of the show know so well. But something feels off. The atmosphere is the same. The plot points might even overlap. Darkly dreaming Dexter forms the backbone of season 1, with the ice truck killer arc playing out in both. But the experience is not. There's an emotional barrier, a sense of disconnect that slowly builds as you read. And that feeling, that creeping discomfort, has a lot to do with one thing in particular: tone. The Dexter TV series walked a tightrope. It was violent, yes, but it was also thoughtful. Beneath the blood and suspense, it was about control, trauma, and identity. Dexter wasn't just a man with a dark passenger. He was a man trying to understand it, to live with it, to tame it. Michael C. Hall's performance constantly walked the line between menace and melancholy. His internal monologues, especially in seasons like 2, 4, and 8, were filled with contradiction, moments of chilling clarity paired with glimpses of doubt and vulnerability. That balance is what gave the character depth. Now compare that to the books. There, Dexter's inner voice is almost gleefully detached. He cracks jokes. He makes flippant comments about murder. It was a lovely night for a dismemberment. Dearly devoted Dexter, Chapter 1. He observes humanity with smug disdain. Instead of a conflicted anti-hero, we get a sociopath who seems, at times, to revel in how clever and emotionless he is. It's not that sarcastic narration can't work. Plenty of iconic characters use wit and cynicism to great effect. But in Dexter's case, it undermines the emotional grounding that made the character sympathetic in the first place. Book. Dexter isn't trying to be human, he's just playing the part, and if he's not even trying to care, why should the reader? That emotional detachment becomes even more pronounced when you look at how violence is handled. On the show, violence always served a purpose. It was brutal, yes, but never without reason. Each kill was a moral dilemma. Each scene of bloodshed was carefully staged to raise questions about justice, ethics, and control. Think of the way Dexter agonizes before killing Miguel Prado's brother in season 3, or how shaken he is by Rita's death at the hands of Trinity in season 4. The violence has weight. In the books, the violence often feels different, not just more graphic, but more performative. There's a tendency to linger on gruesome details, not to shock or provoke, but to embellish. Dexter is Delicious comes to mind, where cannibalism is presented with almost cartoonish flair. That might work in a pulp horror novel, but it clashes with the psychological depth fans of the show are used to. What's more unsettling is that Dexter himself often seems unaffected by it. His tone rarely shifts. There's no introspection, no guilt, just a sense of detached routine, even pleasure. And over time, that repetition wears thin. Without emotional stakes, the gore starts to feel hollow. And this hollowness starts to show in other parts of the narrative too, especially in the pacing. The TV series, at its best, understood slow burns. It let tension simmer. It allowed Dexter's internal conflict to build across episodes. The Bay Harbor Butcher arc in season 2 is a masterclass in that, every decision tightening the noose, every close call raising the stakes. The books, meanwhile, often rush through key moments or lurch between plot points without giving characters room to breathe. Major reveals feel abrupt. Storylines drop in and out. What should feel like psychological suspense ends up more like a checklist of darkly quirky events. Part of this also comes down to the supporting cast and how they're treated. In the show, characters like Deborah, Rita, Dokes, and LaGuerta weren't just background noise. They were essential to Dexter's world. Deborah's arc, in particular, gave the story heart. Her evolving relationship with Dexter, culminating in the moment she discovers his secret in season 7, adds layers the books never attempt. But in the novels, many of these characters are simplified or outright sidelined. Dokes, for example, is killed off early in dearly devoted Dexter, in a plot involving a sadistic torturer that feels disconnected from the series' psychological core. Without those dynamics, Dexter starts to feel like a one-man show, and without tension from relationships, there's no real growth, just more of the same internal monologue. And then, of course, there's the plot. The first book, Darkly Dreaming Dexter, aligns fairly well with season 1 of the show. The ice truck killer, Dexter's secret life, Deborah's suspicions, it's all there. But even then, it lacks the same careful layering. The TV adaptation reshaped key relationships and deepened the emotional stakes, particularly with the reveal that the ice truck killer is Dexter's brother. In the book, that twist lands without much emotional resonance. And after that point, the divergence, book by book, the story spins further out, not just into new territory, but into bizarre ones. The pacing gets more erratic, character development flattens out, and by the time later, books introduce supernatural elements, hinting that Dexter's dark passenger might actually be an ancient demonic force. Dexter in the Dark, Chapter 22. The narrative has fully departed from the grounded, psychological framework the show was known for. It's a massive tonal shift. What was once metaphor becomes literal. Dexter isn't just battling inner demons, he's possibly possessed by one. And while that might sound like an intriguing twist, in practice, it breaks the internal logic of the world. It turns a complex moral study into a paranormal sideshow, and suddenly all the weight, the ambiguity, the introspection, gone. But even stranger is the absence of a clear thematic anchor. The show constantly asked questions about morality, identity, and the possibility of redemption. It didn't always answer them, but they were there, driving the story. Dexter's season-long arcs, from trying to be a better father in season 5 to facing his own code's failings in season 8, gave the audience a reason to care. The books, on the other hand, rarely engage with these ideas in a meaningful way. There's no wrestling with right or wrong, just a kind of numb observation. And without that moral tension, Dexter stops being fascinating. He just becomes a guy who kills people and talks about it. And this is where everything breaks down. Reading the Dexter novels after watching the show is like stepping into a parallel universe where everything looks familiar but nothing feels right. The shell is there, but the soul is missing. It's not about loyalty to the show. It's about honoring the emotional and thematic core that made Dexter more than just another edgy thriller. The books might have started it all, but in the end, it's the show that made Dexter matter. Because Dexter, at its best, wasn't just about blood. It was about control, conflict, morality, and maybe even redemption. Without that, it's just murder for murder's sake. And then there's the writing itself, the actual prose. Jeff Lindsay's style is unique. It's punchy, stylized, often playful, almost noir, but with a dash of Saturday morning cartoon villainy. For some, that might be part of the appeal, but for many, it creates a kind of tonal whiplash. One moment Dexter's reflecting on dismemberment, the next he's cracking off-beat one-liners or comparing himself to a deadly animal in metaphors that feel more cheesy than chilling. I am a predator, a creature of the night, darkly Dreaming Dexter, Chapter 2. It's a rhythm that never quite settles, like the story's constantly trying to decide whether it wants to be a dark thriller, a satire, or something in between. And that indecision shows up in the way suspense is handled too. In the show, tension often came from restraint, from what wasn't said, long pauses, doubt, subtext. Think of Dexter staring into the mirror, not saying a word, just looking. The books, by contrast, tend to tell you everything. Dexter spells it all out, usually in the most literal way possible. There's no room for ambiguity, for interpretation, and while that might make the books more accessible in some ways, it also robs the story of nuance. You're not invited into Dexter's world, you're lectured about it. What's fascinating is how these differences also affect audience perception. Viewers of the show often liked Dexter despite themselves. They were disturbed, conflicted. They shouldn't root for him, but they did. And that tension was the whole point. Readers of the books, though, are more likely to view Dexter as cartoonish, flat, even annoying, because without that inner conflict, without that emotional push and pull, there's no guilt in liking him. And strangely, that makes him less interesting. When you stop questioning a character like Dexter, he stops being complex. He becomes just another gimmick. And maybe that's the ultimate irony. The Dexter novels gave birth to an idea, a brilliant one, but it took the show to truly bring it to life. The tragedy, the tension, the discomfort, all of that was carefully sculpted for television. The books have the bones, but the show gave them flesh. And when we look back on Dexter as a cultural moment, when we remember what made it stick, it's not just the concept we recall, it's the feeling. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Dexter content just like this.